Welcome. Okay, people are slowly coming in. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Okay, numbers are still increasing. Okay, numbers have slowed down a little bit. So I think we're probably ready to kick off. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today's keynote with John Kraska from EveryLibrary on how to access maximum Arpa funds. As always, we're going to give everyone a few moments to log in and get settled. You'll also notice the chat panel at the bottom of your screen. Make sure you're sharing with all attendees and panelists and let us know where you're joining from today. So as everybody's gets settled in and navigates to chat, we wanted to share a brief video with you all. So this video is meant to have sound. Unfortunately, the sound is not working at the moment for some reason. Okay, here we go. Again, welcome to anyone just logging in. Today is my pleasure to welcome John Kraska. John's a founder and executive director of EveryLibrary, the first super PAC for libraries, and the EveryLibrary Institute, a public policy and tax policy think tank for library. Since 2012, EveryLibrary has provided pro bono support to 117 library communities with ballot measures and tax referendum, helping win over 1.8 billion in stable tax funding. The EveryLibrary Institute supports individual library workers through the Halo Fund and libraries through the Fund Libraries crowdfunding platform. He's a former board president of the Berwyn Public Library and Riles, the reaching across Illinois library system. Prior to EveryLibrary, he was a partner of Associate Direct, an association consultancy, and was director for membership development at ALA. He was recognized by Library Journal in 2014 as a mover and shaker. Hi, John. And I'm Georgette Kenny. I'm the Vice President of Global Marketing here at Bibliotheca. And behind the scenes, we have Caroline Lane and Mackenzie Carrain from our marketing team, making sure things run smoothly. You may see them sharing links in chat or answering technical questions you may have. We will share the chat log and presentation with everyone, so please feel free to engage and know you'll get a copy of the information shared. One more reminder to make sure you switched your chat settings to engage with all panelists. We will have time for a live Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you want to raise a question, please use the function You can upvote other submissions as well, so we can raise the most relevant conversations. With that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to John.
Hi, Georgette. Thanks so much to you and Caroline and Mackenzie. Mackenzie, thanks already for the tech support. I'm going to ask you to do the next slide, please. The work that we do here at EveryLibrary is supported by partners across. Well, first off, I want to make sure that we understand where we're starting with today. We're going to be working today across a couple of different areas that are a bit of an undiscovered country for some libraries. I'm also going to be asking you to, if you have breadcrumbs and pathways and benchmarks already for some of these, to help build the ecosystem by sharing as well. We're going to go through just a real quick thing about who we are as EveryLibrary, but then I want to make sure that we understand that this session is not necessarily going to be trammeling current ground or old ground. I want to get into what state and local relief funds look like, and how before and after the pandemic, there's programs that look a lot like the state and local relief funds that we need to be aware of, not just to maximize our ARPA opportunities, but for the everyday funding that's available from the federal government in some of those same rubrics. I want to dive into before school, after school, and summer school, because for the public library community that's on this call today, or this webinar today, so much of our focus, so much of our emphasis, so much of our staff time is spent in these places. Why aren't we accessing the proper funding that we need in order to be more successful, either as a standalone agency or as a partner? Likewise, I want to dive into broadband and E-rate, mainly because, and this violates my first rule about this program today, this webinar today, not to cover old ground, but this is a new program that I want to get into, and it's open right now, and it's only open for a short amount of time. And if we don't act on it now, we're going to really be kicking ourselves later. And then we're going to get into some things around workforce, and then I want to recap a little bit before Q&A about what it means to think through the policy implications and why is this so difficult right now for libraries to find the funding they need to find themselves in the formula. Next slide, please, Mackenzie. First off, EveryLibrary, we have two components, as Georgette said. This is not anything other than to establish some bona fides. We work on public library and school library funding all day long. On our political side, EveryLibrary, it's a super PAC for libraries. We're focused on funding through election days, negotiations with city councils and county government, school boards as well, the funding formula that supports the mission, vision, and values that are being expressed through the library. It is inherently political, and I do want to thank Bibliotheca as one of our corporate sponsors and donors, a longtime supporter. They look at the work that we're doing, we look at their approach, and realize that we are ourselves mission aligned on trying to make sure that libraries have the resources that libraries need, and librarians and library workers are empowered through budgets. Then on the EveryLibrary Institute side, that's set up as our nonprofit organization. It's a 501c3. It is a public policy, tax policy, and education policy think tank, ideally for libraries. The approach there is research. It is conversations with other policymakers. We are heavily coalition focused, of course, inside libraries, but outside of libraries much more critically. Many of the waypoints that I'm going to be giving you today, many of the breadcrumbs today come from the fact that we're coalition members or partners on issues like workforce, on issues like broadband, on issues like before school, after school, and out of school, on topics that bridge away, not away from libraries, but into other parts of our infrastructure of communities. All right, next slide, please. I want to get some baseline from you here with a poll, though, and Mackenzie can launch at any time. I want to ask you a couple questions about how familiar you are personally. We've got 155 people, 156 people live on this one right now. How familiar are you with the topics we're going to be addressing? Because if I got a big group of extremely competent people, I want to do a master's class. Otherwise, I want to make sure that we get this 101, 201 going for you. And the existing funding formula for libraries within that IMLS or state library rubric, I want to make sure that we're all tracking together. Usually after about 70%, oh, you're all coming in. That's really great. All right, so I don't think statistically, unless there's a cohort of real outliers that's going to influence it too much, 3/4 of us from the bottom up understand what's happening through IMLS and the state library. That's great. Like I said, I'm not going to be heavily diving into that anyways, because there's some great other opportunities there. And that we have some glancing familiarity. Okay, cool. Then let's dive in for that master's class. Okay, Mackenzie, thank you for that. If you can stop sharing that one and move us along. And Mackenzie, I still see the poll on our shared screen. If you can somehow or another kill that, I'd appreciate it. In the meantime, as we said, this is not a big session about IMLS, but I want to give them props for where props is due. And the state libraries as well. If you are currently in that no category on the poll about not being familiar with it here, this is the time. This is the time to lean in, because there is a tremendous amount of funding coming for library programs through the existing funding formula. And that's the key word here. It's the existing funding formula for libraries. Our friends at Library Journal have put together some fantastic resources. And folks, you're going to get the entire bibliography and the whole slide deck after I'm done. They've put together an extraordinary set of resources on that article about how the American Rescue Plan works for libraries. In fact, I stole their infographic here. And they highlight a couple of different states and how the state library is fulfilling its covenant with its libraries around their states on moving money in different programmatic ways. And it is a model, by the way, for all of the rest of what I'm going to be describing here. There's an existing plan. There's an existing set of authorizations. There's an existing set of activity that is allowable activity for eligible entities. Oh, by the way, there's a $15 million pot of competitive grant money that IMLS has also issued within the Arpa framework, the American Rescue Plan framework, that if you're not paying attention to, you need to, for a couple reasons. One is that, well, you could get funded for something that is in your value system, your mission, or your vision. The other is the disciplines of applying for it, because I got to tell you, folks, if we don't ask for and we don't oversubscribe as an industry to the grants that are offered that have the word library in it, why the heck is Congress going to ever fund us again? And I'm going to be a little bit frank here because, well, let's go on to the next slide and 2, if you don't mind. This is our transition slide here. The ARPA structure, the American Rescue Plan, fundamentally, the way it was passed by Congress, as you might recall from the news, was to do it through reconciliation. Reconciliation is a particular congressional approach where they are not creating new programs, they are extra funding, overfunding, superfunding existing programs, which means that when you do a Control F and you want to find on the big PDF or Word doc of the American Rescue Plan, it's why you can only find a couple of mentions of the noun library. Because we are only, as an industry, in a couple of places with the word library specifically. But our mission, our vision, and our value system is heavily embedded in the hopes that Congress has, the Department of Treasury has, the Education Department, Department of Agriculture, HUD, they all have hopes for remediating problems and growing more vibrant, interesting, thriving communities. The prosperity conversation here is really deep, and yet the existing programs don't have the noun library in many places. So we have to instead essentially reverse engineer the intent of Congress. The intent of Congress here, there's 4 parts to the rest of this presentation. The state and local relief funds, and I want to give you some insights into what the mission, vision, and values of that particular program is, and then how it relates to community block grant development funds after the pandemic's over. Like I said before, Congress could only, through this particular mechanism of reconciliation, overfund, extra fund, superfund existing programs. And these existing programs, short of really significant congressional action, are going to exist next fiscal year, and the fiscal year after that, and the fiscal year after that as well. We're going to talk about the summer and after school and the bridge that is to 21st century community learning centers. We're going to talk about the Emergency Connectivity Fund and the bridge that is to E-rate, and then workforce supports that are deeply embedded in how ARPA works. There's a giant pile of money here, folks, and very, very little of it, except for those last three on the page there, have the noun library included. Next slide, please. Treasury programs. These are state level and local level programs. And I'm giving you billions of dollars here, even though your particular jurisdiction, there's a slide later on for each city and county and non-entitlement entity about what they are receiving from the federal government. I want to give you the framework here, because Congress, with the American Rescue Plan and all of its concomitant parts, was not a stimulus bill, it was an emergency relief bill. And maybe in your particular community, like mine here in suburban Cook County, things are looking up, or it might be a little tough for you. Like I was reading about in the news in like central Arkansas, where they got a lot of cases on that Delta variation. But the relief program basically says, get as much money as you can with some broad definitions that reference existing programs in order to get people moving again back to work and mitigate the health issues. Each state has a tremendous amount of latitude on how they're going to be allocating these funds. Each county, each municipality, cities, towns, each tribal government, and what's also called non-entitlement units of local government. And folks, a couple of you came in today, I saw your names coming through. I want to say hi to Madeline, Carrie's here. Hey, Rob, Sarah. The special districts are not included. If you're an independent library district and you're not in that non-entitlement unit of government section, the non-entitlement unit of government section is intended for things like townships and boroughs and other non-home rule defined areas. I want to talk to you a minute about what happens with special districts, though, in just a moment. Each state, each county, each city, town, municipality, and even these non-entitlement units of government have a wide range of discretionary power. The work that we need to do to reverse engineer this is truly based on the value system and the mission that Congress was putting together. Our colleagues at the National Association of State Budget Officers, they're doing a lot of work right now to track legislation and gubernatorial plans to spend the ARPA funding. And the problem and the opportunity we have, again, is that the word library is not mapped in many of these places, if at all. The timing for early July right now is that many of these states already have legislation and gubernatorial plans in place. So we have to understand what the priorities are and map backwards what our work is in libraries. Continued efforts to address the COVID-19 crisis is a key priority, but economic relief and recovery, workforce development, economic development, tourism, green infrastructure are all in these state plans. In fact, if you can go to the next slide for me, Mackenzie. The National Association of State Budget Officers is tracking these plans. This is an interesting webinar to present because I got 51 and then really 52 because there's some across the countries, but 51 ideas here to present. So I need you to do your homework as well. COVID relief, economic relief, public health, education, workforce training, economic development and tourism is baked in there, and the infrastructure ideas around broadband and around green infrastructure. What I would like to be able to help you think through is how are you programmatically service, staffing, partnership aligned? Now, the pathway on this kind of funding moves through the states, and this is a good dossier from our friends at the National Association of State Budget Officers of some of the priorities for certain exemplar states. Not every state has released their framework. Not every state has approved the governor's proposal. So there is still time to do some of that advocacy work. But more fundamentally, there's time that we need to take very deliberately to say, how does our libraries work map to education, workforce, the diversification of the economy? How do things like our technology support access to the global market? How does our collection support ideation and gig workers? How does local infrastructure spending potentially, well, I mean, I don't know how many of you need new windows, but putting in new windows, quite frankly, puts people to work. And it benefits the fact that the library should be a clean, well-lighted, safe, and welcoming place. The words that are used here are not literacy. They're not story time. They're not adult services. They're not even, the word database doesn't appear in here anywhere. And right now, from my research through what the folks at NASBO have put up, there's only one state that I've been able to find that even has a framework that includes extra non-LSTA, non-state library. Okay, great. We can look at the state library all day. I love them. We work with them all the time. CASA is a great partner of ours, but not through the state library. North Carolina gets a gold star right now. North Carolina gets a gold star right now because there's $60 million in funds for the recovery grants for arts, history, libraries, science, and film. There's my bifocals for you, with an $8.5 million allocation for libraries, above and beyond, in addition to, and independent of. All right, next slide, please. There's one key state level program that I want to highlight for you that is shovel ready, essentially. The Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund is a state administered program within ARPA that's $10 billion across states and territories and tribal government for critical capital projects. And I'm giving you really long slides to read because you deserve deep information. And again, there's a 4 or 5 page bibliography at the end of this presentation that will help you follow these breadcrumbs, because the opportunities to put broadband funding to work in a couple of different places is extraordinarily important for public libraries. And you might not necessarily be interested in what we're going to be talking about later, which is the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is about buying hotspots and wireless connectivity devices in order to give them to patrons. You might be more interested in seeing the build outs, or you might be wanting to work across a municipality, a community, a borough, a rural or urban or suburban area where it's outside of E-rate. There are some great components to those programs. No shade on them at all. This is a diversified revenue portfolio, folks. The challenges that are laid bare by the pandemic that could be addressed by this capital projects funds, especially in rural and low-income communities. The infrastructure that is the library as a node of personal well-being, of community connectivity, of telehealth and health informatics, of the gig economy, of startups, all of those different places. And I want to highlight this one in particular because we're not really talking about this one right now for some reason or another inside libraries, but it has to be comprehensive across units of government and nonprofits and other community-based nodes. And if I could find a different vocabulary word for library, it would be community node for a lot of different things. Next slide, please. Then from the state level to the local level, local fiscal recovery funds. Folks, this is where the rubber hits the road on that big $350 billion pot of money that everybody's been talking about. Local fiscal recovery funds go to, again, counties. And here on the slide, there's a county by county breakdown. One of the most arresting things you can do to a county commissioner or supervisor or a parish commissioner is to tell them the truth that you already know how much they're getting. And we need to have a serious conversation about how to allocate it properly. Likewise with cities, there's your city by city breakdown. And these non-entitlement units of government, those of you who are working in places that are otherwise unincorporated, might be non-home rule entities. There's a lot of different definitions in a lot of different states. The thing I need you to notice here, though, is that libraries that are districts are not in this funding formula right now. There is a pathway and a mechanism that I'll get to in just a second. But we have a problem here existentially moving forward in the future because special districts, and whether that's a library district, a power and water district, a cemetery district, park districts. We have a lot of colleagues who are park districts who are facing a similar problem as you are. If you're running a library district, that's how do I get to it? And yes, they have to take the same look at what are eligible uses of the fund and align their mission, vision, and values to that to be recognized. And they have to do it in partnership with, but I'll get to that in a second, local fiscal recovery funds. The laundry list there is very similar to the states, but the permission that Congress and the Department of Treasury have given to municipalities, county commissioners, city councils, town boards, to do good things with it are focused on public health expenditures. The next one, address negative economic impacts caused by the public health crisis. It's not addressing the public health crisis, folks. The direct object in that sentence is the economic impact. So we go back to that same laundry list before. Economic recovery. How's your collection, program services, and staffing potentially supporting the economic recovery or the economic development? What are you doing for? And what are you doing for? And what are your collections, programs, and services doing if properly resourced? Tourism is in here. Green infrastructure, again, is in here. The workforce development opportunities are in here. And the reason I'm not harping on before school, after school, and out of school in summer is because I got a whole section coming up about that. But what is embedded in here and what you have to do if you're a department of government, if you're a county department library, if you're a city department library, a town or township or borough library, is understand the priorities. Understand the local plan, the same way that you have to reverse engineer a governor's plan or a state legislative plan, and map what an input of funding does. What an input of funding does to extend your success. Because one of two key reasons to fund you at all here, folks, is to extend your success already working on economic recovery or workforce or economic development or tourism or the green infrastructure projects that make a more clean and well-lighted and welcoming place. The broadband and the technology that already extending that success on before school, after school, or summer, or the other reason to give you any funding at all is to fix failure. Fixing failure is really at the heart of this rescue plan. The word rescue is in the title. If we don't have the proper resources, the collection that supports the community, the staffing that are professional and capable, if we don't have the hours and the clean, well-lighted place, we will continue to be failing. We've got 52 different kinds of approaches to putting this money together just at the state level. We have a lot of counties and a lot of cities, a lot of towns, a lot of townships. Again, this is breadcrumbs, folks. It's waypoints. And none of it is a control F to find the word library. Next slide, please. I talked before about how it goes to counties and cities. It goes to municipal entities and non-entitlement parts of government, and that special districts are not included directly. Some people know that that's a problem, including us here at EveryLibrary, but there's a pathway, and it's a strange pathway. Congress apparently did not listen to the Special Districts Association, the National Special Districts Association, when they were proposing a pathway for this. But there's no current mechanism except through the IMLS LSTA funding for libraries in particular, which they're already funding up to the tune of $200 million. There's no other real, there's a couple of very awkward pathways for other special districts. So Congress just punted it and said, you can ask for, as a special district, a transfer from another entity that's an eligible entity, a county, a city, a town, a township, a non-entitlement unit of government. You have to go to them and ask for a transfer. And the transfer has to be for eligible activity. And they have to entertain, listen to, and negotiate with you in order to transfer the money directly. Yes, a county can contract with or bring in a partnership with an independent library district that's coterminous with a county, or maybe it's a multi-county system, or it's a township library, it's the only library, or it's a town library, it's the only library, it's a nonprofit library. But if you're a district library, this approach to transferring funding is not well spelled out in statute. It's allowable, you are eligible, but it's not a requirement, which means that unless you are a particularly blessed and lucky library director at a district library, you've never heard from your county commissioners or supervisors, your city council, your mayor, your town manager. They've never volunteered this for you. And we have really until the end of 2024 to work on getting the transfers that you are eligible for, but not entitled to. Nobody's going to fight this one for you, but we're here to help if you need it. Again, it's the same mechanisms. How do we mitigate disaster? Economic recovery, workforce retooling, economic development, issues like tourism. How do you put people to work putting in green infrastructure in your library? And then we'll get onto some other stuff in a moment. I'm sorry to be the bearer potentially of bad news here, folks. There's no magic bullet, but there is authority within the law in helping you think through how to approach, well, those counties as a special district, cities as a special district, towns, townships, etc. Like I said before, I'm here to help. Next slide, please, Mackenzie. Got a quick question for everybody, because I want to transfer away from the pandemic and into what happens next fiscal year. I have a question about, has your library accessed funds previously from the Community Block Grant Development Program? That's not ARPA. This predates ARPA. This will post-date ARPA. And I'm asking this question in the hope that somebody's going to say yes successfully. There seems to be a trend line here. Good. This is new information then for our community here. Not to cut you off, but again, oh, and anybody who says yes successfully, I want to have a chat with you because I want to host a webinar to look under the hood on Community Block Grant Development Funds, particularly. Mackenzie, I think we have a preponderance of evidence here. I think we can end this one. Thank you. The vast majority of us have not, and if you can go to the next slide, please, access the Community Block Grant Development Funds. ARPA is a daunting situation. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars. Community Block Grant Development Funds is only just a couple billion. And it existed before and it will exist after the crisis is over. For municipal libraries, cities and counties, and also non-entitlement units of government libraries, special districts are always weird. Nonprofit libraries are already baked into the Community Block Grant Development Fund program. Now, I'm going to talk about this one mainly, but I also need to say the same learnings happen for friends in our rural communities as they do for our colleagues in urban communities. With the USRDA, the Rural Development Agency, it's substantially similar. The Community Block Grant Development Program and the Rural Development Agency provide grants on a formula basis to states, cities, and counties to develop urban communities on the Community Block Grant side, and rural communities. It's a slightly different definition, but what your service, for many of us, our service populations have cut across both urban, suburban, and rural. The focus on these is substantially similar to what I've been talking about with the ARPA money, and it's going to exist in future fiscal years. Some of it's around community-based housing. You're not going to touch that to your library, I get that. Unless you're going to try and co-locate potentially with mixed use for seniors. Or you're going to try and co-locate perhaps with HUD on the housing and urban development side for public housing, or on the rural ag side for different enterprise zones. Yeah, you might actually have some opportunity to access, you put your library into that context around fixed site locations in communities of need for that mixed use housing. But really it's about, well, the same set of priorities: economic development, workforce, even tourism, infrastructure, and the public infrastructure and facilities component in here, mainly on the Community Block Grant Development side, a little less on the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Agency side, and that's why I'm emphasizing more in this presentation, community block grant development funds, is that you can sometimes do good things for your building. All right. The one thing that's different between ARPA, which is a universal disaster problem, and community block grant development funds in the USRDA is that there's different formulas around poverty. And that's an important thing to plan for, because the issues of equity and access that are baked into how librarians and library workers are wired. I mean, when 96% of us thought leaders on this webinar don't have a view to community block grant development funds, I'd like to suggest that this is the strongest place we can go, and after ARPA. And we would be very happy here at EveryLibrary to do some convenings around how do we make ourselves, I hate to use the word, but I'm already this many slides into it, shovel ready. All right, let me put a pin in that and move on to the next section. Summer and after school. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Summer and after school. We do so much work right now on summer reading, and we don't get enough credit for it, and we don't get paid for it enough. Before school, after school. At the state level, SEA, okay, so the way that ARPA is set up, Treasury Department gave local and state fiscal relief money to municipalities and states. ARPA gave money to schools. And they expect the majority of activity around before school, after school, out of school, and summer to be funded directly through a school or in partnerships and coalitions with other community-based organizations and units of government. Public libraries are not eligible directly for a nickel of this. Public libraries are extraordinary partners, but you need to get paid for it. The work that's being done here with the American Rescue Plan, again, it goes to states. So there's state level programs, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a laundry list, all right? And then there are LEAs. SEA is state education agencies. LEA is local education agencies. Everybody's got jargon. We don't want to talk about MARC records with them. They don't want to talk about SEA and LEA with us. State education agencies are your state departments of education. LEAs are school districts. And the interesting thing about ARPA funding is that it's district level and not school level, except with Title I. And Title I is, of course, communities of poverty. And if we're thinking about your hometown, if it's 70% school lunch, 80% school lunch, 90% school lunch in your whole town, we've got some things to do even in that Title I space beyond the ARPA space. And as we get to the end of this section, I want to talk about 21st century community learning centers, because that's the component that predates ARPA and will post-date ARPA. Next slide, please. Summer, before school, and after school funding. There's $122 billion for the states. There's $122 billion for summer enrichment programs that has to be spent by 2023, September of 2023. We have 2 school years and 3 summers, and school districts and state education agencies are trying to find the quickest pathway to help as many children and their families as they can. And they are capable immediately of partnering with public libraries on this topic. I got a whole other thing about how school libraries should be set up for this. That's not what I'm talking about. No offense to somebody who's on a school library here in this webinar. But public libraries, and if we've missed the boat for the summer of 2021, I'd like to remind you, please, that summer of 2022 and summer of 2023. But it starts with a pathway at the state level for competitive grants. Each of your states has a competitive grant program. Each of your states has a Title I coordinator that's looking to ameliorate problems in communities of poverty. This is not just about that, though. Title I is a significant component, but this is every community. Next slide, please. The pathways are through, generally speaking, and they look a lot like in the school, before school, after school, out of school, and summertime. They look a lot like the 21st century community learning center programs, of which very, very, very few, well, I don't want to prejudge that. I'll talk about that in a minute. Here's some paths. Here's some examples. This comes from the After School Alliance. This is a fantastic organization, like I said before, EveryLibrary is a member of the After School Alliance. We're a member in order to pay attention. We pay a lot of attention on the school side, of course, but on the public library side too. These are state education department grant programs in a couple exemplar states. All of them. Okay, when you see the word school districts and community-based organizations, you see the word library in there, even though you would have to do not just a control F, but whatever your find and replace is. The nonprofits that are out there that are eligible might be shaped like a library foundation or a friends group. And again, this is a 51, 52, kind of state kind of approach. So I can help you dive in particular. We can even caucus around this in terms of, so individual community-based organizations can partner with individual school districts or boys and girls clubs or camps, and I'm not asking you to replace any of them. I'm asking you, where can you augment? Unless, of course, you might be the only functioning part of government with a clean, well-lighted place besides the school. So you might actually have to do some gap filling. Summer 22 and summer 2023, we're still going to be facing the same challenges. All right, next slide, please. 35% of high school students don't have any supervised place to go after 3 p.m. These 21st century community learning centers, folks, the way that it works is that in ARPA, under ESSER, outside of the SEA, which is the state education agency, the State Department of Education, outside of the LEA itself, which is the school districts itself, the rest of the money flows in 2021, 2022, 2023, and beyond, generally speaking, through pre-screened 21st century community learning center organizations, largely nonprofits. The pre-screened 21st century community learning center external organization partners are themselves, as grant recipients, looking for more partners. And your library, your public library, needs to understand who they are. Every single one of your states maintains a list, and it's in the bibliography at the end of this program. Every single one of your states has a pre-screened, okay, so 2021, you're not pre-screened, I've looked. 2022, could you be? By 2023, you should be. As a unit of government, as a nonprofit, and when I say nonprofit here, I mean, if your library itself is a 501c3, you can skip to the head of the line. If not, it's your foundation, your friends group. As a conduit for funding to support your summer reading program, not just because somebody's doing a book sale, bake sale, some nice person gave you $5. Let's get you enterprise level funding in order to stand in that learning gap, to create new discovery for students and children of all ages and incomes. The eligible entity drives the funding decision, so we either have to adapt ourselves to look like fundable entities, or we need to become involved heavily. Can you go to the next slide, Mackenzie? I need to know how many of you right now, in order to understand where I need to go as a partner of yours potentially, how many of you, if you can launch the poll, are already part of this 21st Century Community Learning Center? Yeah, within the partnerships and coalitions is a mode that most libraries start with. And I'm taking a deep breath here. I'm feeling a little flush because, so again, so many of us are not in line with or in line for the funding opportunities that should be supporting the core of our work. All right, we can end this poll, I think. That's cool. Next slide, please, Mackenzie. So here's some breadcrumbs for you to begin to understand in proximity to your state Department of Education and your local school districts, some proximity to the local and statewide pre-screened 21st century community learning centers. Now, this is one place you can actually kind of do a controlled F and find library a little bit, but mainly on the school side, because there are opportunities for the school districts to put their school library programs to work after 3 p.m. And that's a natural pathway for partnerships to public libraries as well. About a third of after-school programs happen away from a school. About half of the ones that happen away from the school are happening in faith-based or community-based organizations, and about a third of them are happening in public libraries. But how many of them are happening in public libraries with you as simply not as a partner, but just as a space? I hate to ask. Highly recommend, if this is burning in your heart right now, my gosh, we do so much work on summer. Why aren't we getting paid for it properly? My gosh, we do so much work on after school and before school and out of school time? The After School Alliance has a webinar coming up on July 8th that I have to recommend to you. The link's here, but if you look up After School Alliance, it's tapping into the American Rescue Plan. Their domain, unlike mine, is exclusively on summer and after school time. And they've never heard from a library. All right, next slide, please. Let me dive into broadband for just a minute. We've already heard about this from people. Shelby, the School, Hospital, and Library Broadband Coalition, and DIA, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, have been pushing on this. We've seen some webinars from other places too, like LJ and ALA and everything. The Emergency Connectivity Fund program, I wouldn't touch on it because it's been covered in so many other places. But it's open right now, and it's only open until August 13th, and it's $7 billion. And libraries are in it, along with schools. And it's this program that says we want to put tablets, laptops, Wi-Fi hotspots, modems mainly, not routers for individuals, into the hands of humans who need it for the big things: education, economic well-being, recovery. There has to be utilization of these funds, folks. And I'm not suggesting that you have to individually utilize it, but the all y'all libraries, there's $7 billion in funding to have you buy stuff that you can keep and continue to circulate after the pandemic is over. Rural, urban, suburban, multi-county library system, you serve 250 people. The formula here, though, is very similar to E-rate. And again, let me ask that poll question real quick, because I need to know where I need to go with this, Mackenzie. If you can do the next slide. And the poll, how many of you have applied for E-rate previously? Oh, this is great. This is fantastic. All right, great. The mechanisms of applying for this emergency connectivity funding is very similar. So if you have not already applied for the emergency connectivity funding, which is only open through the 13th of August, if you can go to the next slide, please, there. The emergency connectivity funding, like I said, it's only available through the 13th. There are some extraordinarily important resources to take a look at. If you have not applied for E-rate before, let's consider this a gateway opportunity for you. Now, it's not going to ameliorate your problems with switches and fiber to the library and last mile and tier 1 and tier 2 supports. And if that's not common vocabulary to you, that's cool. Your state E-rate coordinator would love to work with you through your state library after the pandemic is over. Well, actually, even while it's still happening, but with an eye towards future fiscal years. But I would highly recommend taking a deep dive into what the USAC has, what the FCC has, because they're the ones, well, the whole version of success here for this particularly earmarked program around broadband is 2 metrics: the number of connected devices funded with the funds, because Congress wants to make sure that it's actually going to work, that are provided to students, staff, and library patrons who would otherwise lack access to devices to engage in remote learning, and 2, the number of broadband internet access connections through the Wi-Fi hotspots that support students, school staff, and library patrons who would otherwise lack access to engage in these different allowable activities. Again, Shelby, the School, Hospitals, and Libraries Broadband Coalition, is our industry's authoritative resource for E-rate and these sorts of special programs during the crisis. Likewise, I would highly recommend taking a look at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, because they've been a key mover on a lot of broadband policy and a lot of broadband funding that happens to have libraries either included or adjacent. All right, workforce. Mackenzie, you're right. I need to keep moving. How do I want to put this? The ARPA funding at the state and local level. This is one place besides IMLS/LSTA, besides the NEA and the NEH, that you can actually do a Control F on it and find allowable activity and the word library in it. And I'm not sure why we don't spend more time talking about this in our industry. And I want to highlight it for you in the ARPA framework, as well as in the Workforce Opportunity and Investment Act, especially Title II, which governs adult literacy services and workforce training and skills building. There's a whole series of allowable activities that if your library already does, they should be doing it. You should be doing it at scale or replicably, including basic adult education, adult secondary education, workforce preparation, ELL, ELA, the corrections and recidivism. There is a deep understanding on the part of Congress during the rescue plan that if we don't help people retool after a very disruptive economic time, there won't be a recovery. Your library, public libraries of all types, are already included in the definitions. Here's a couple examples here for you from state plans. They are putting the majority of their state rescue plan funding to work on the economy because it ain't stupid to do it. Again, our friends at NASBO, the National Association of State Budget Officers, are tracking this. These are state plans. Let me show you the next slide. Oh, actually, forgive me. Let me ask you first. In a poll, are any of us currently doing Workforce and Innovation Act grant programs that are funded by Title II? This is the adult literacy. It's several $1 billion pre-pandemic. It's going to be several $1 billion after the pandemic. All right, 15 seconds in, Mackenzie. We're at 90% on no. We're at 11% though on yes within a partnership or coalition. I want to give everybody gold stars on that one. Because let's talk about why. And let me pause here for some questions, because we're coming right around the horn for this. All right. The single largest funder of adult literacy services in the United States of America is not a foundation. It's not Gates. It's not Wallace. It's not Lilly. It's not anybody you hear about on NPR. It's the federal government through Title II of the Workforce Opportunity and Innovation Act. There is a state by state by state by state, individual state unified 4-year workforce innovation Workforce Opportunity and Innovation Act plan that is in place right now for your state and Washington, D.C. That looks at interagency collaborations, the 11% of you who are currently doing it in coalition gold star, data-driven strategies about how literacy improves economic development in communities. And if you need some of that research, EveryLibrary Institute has it compiled for you. How it improves individual prosperity and family prosperity. Each and every one of your states already has in the definition at section 203 of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, that libraries are an eligible provider of those services that I mentioned before, either at a state level or at a local level. You're actually F in the laundry list, in between community-based organizations and right before faith-based organizations. So we have very few excuses not to lean in on this workforce economic recovery and economic development and tourism and the gig economy and your technology and collections that support people's self-discovery. Maybe it's a first, next, or best job. Maybe it's recidivism and folks leaving the correctional system. We're already in it. And every state has an office that coordinates these funding programs already. I have a link provided to you right here. Some are in the workforce department, Some are in the Labor Department of your state. Many of them are in the State Department of Education. There's a couple delegated agencies, like in a couple states, there's some universities that do it because that's the way things are built. But how do we put smart money to work in communities to build more thriving, interesting, and in particular, prosperous places? I think that brings us around, Georgette, to our time here when it comes to questions. Mackenzie, is that where we're at right now with the next slide? Oh, I'm sorry, real quick. Let me dive in on this after we're done with questions, Georgette. I'm sure we got a raft of them. No, Georgette, come back on screen.
Yeah.
Let's do them now.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions that have come through, and there's a couple that have been upvoted. So one of the ones that's been upvoted is from Samantha Young, saying, how would we find out the level of funding for our jurisdiction at the county municipality level? We're looking for funding opportunities to build a more agile workforce.
That's fantastic. So NACO, the National Association of Counties, on their ARPA page has every single county in the United States of America with the exact dollar amount allocated by Congress. And then each county by law has to at least have a framework, if not a detailed plan. If they have a detailed plan, how do you map yourself to that? If they have a framework, how do you ensure that as the framework advances, you're part of it? That's either conversations over cups of coffee or it's direct lobbying activity. I'd be happy to help you think it through.
Okay, so next question from Christopher Shipper. I'm very curious to know how academic libraries that operate within a larger organization, example, colleges and universities, might avail themselves of these funds.
Christopher, I would love to be able to do that. It's a whole other 45-minute presentation. Not to turf it, but there is specifically higher ed relief within the ESSER components of the American Rescue, the elementary and secondary education relief funds. But the basics are one of two ways: as a programmatic partner or as an infrastructure partner. But you're going to have to find either the local unit of government that understands that you don't quite fit the definition, but you do fit the outcomes, or with a nonprofit partner that's looking for, quite frankly, the weight of having the university or college or community college attached to it.
Okay, next question from Christopher Shipper. I'm very curious. Oh, sorry, wrong one. From Anne Margaret Rice. When researching the grant opportunity for devices, my staff discovered some unreasonable demands related to documented how we circulate these devices to. Things related to keeping circulation records based on names and how these patrons actually qualify to use the devices, meaning they say, and we document that they don't have the access to laptops, etc. The whole thing seemed unreasonable from a PL standpoint.
Right.
Did we misinterpret something?
No, you didn't. And one person's onerous burden is another's regulatory responsibility. One person's problem with it is transparency in government, which is why I wanted to highlight other ways to pursue broadband and devices in that other state level program. It might not be the right fit for your library to go with the emergency connectivity fund. And I think that that's an appropriate decision matrix. So as you get a chance to review this materials later, go back to that one slide about broadband at the state level, because you might have a more appropriate pathway given your either governance or policy structure.
Okay, so there's a question from James Ratchlin. Can any of these programs be counted on or expected to provide money for more than 1 year to reduce the risk of setting up a program that lasts only a single year?
So the ARPA funding has sunset dates, but the rubrics for the ARPA funding are substantially similar to community block grant development funds, 21st century community learning centers, the E-rate program, and the Workforce and Innovation Title II Act. The reason I shared these particular ones is that while ARPA funds will sunset by statute, I mean, my hand to God, I hope they do, because it means the crisis is over. These other programs, you would be able to dovetail, not automatically, you got to do the work, but you'd be able to dovetail right into something else that has enduring funding.
Okay, so then there's a question from Craig Scott. I thought the minimum amount of ARPA funds allocated from IMLS to states was $2 million. Your slide showed many states with less than that.
It's not $2 million per state. It's $200 million overall. There were certain holdbacks, there were certain allocations, there were certain programs, grant funding programs that happen at the federal level, but each state has a well-known state-by-state allocation. And then what I was showing in there were particular programmatic priorities within that state-by-state allocation.
Okay, and then Cheryl Morgan asks, can your 501c3 county-based library consortium become pre-screened for 21st century program funds and then use those to support activities at all participating libraries and with community partners? If so, what is the process?
I don't know the process in your state. Sorry, I love your accent, Georgia.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. My fault. Chicago, it's process.
Process.
Yes, but the waypoints for you are in the dossier that we have, and I can certainly talk to you about it. In theory, you are describing an agency that has tremendous leverage for 21st century learning. I would think that there should be a good, robust conversation, a fresh conversation about doing that. I don't see any impediments.
Okay, and lastly, I have one question for you, John. If you could give just one tip, action step, or piece of advice for all librarians out there, what would that be? That
understanding that form follows function, not just with architecture, but with grant funding. No, I'm sorry, you can go ahead, Kenzie, this is a good one. That form follows function, that the form of the library. If you're a special district, we have to behave in a particular way. If you're a municipal library, you have to behave in a particular way. If you're a nonprofit library, the form allows you to function with these kinds of grant programs, but the core of it is that it's about mission and value system alignments. Quick lessons here for us, if we could. Authorizations that drive our appropriations. Right now, folks, we have, as an industry, as a sector, have to have a reckoning about the fact that we are only in one federal program substantially. We have to diversify our revenue authority. If you're not in the authorizing language for workforce, if you're not in the authorizing language for education, if you're not in the authorizing, you're not going to be in the appropriation. We've seen it starkly. We need to access more revenue besides the core of IMLS and E-rate, and I hope that this has been a helpful situation for you. We also have to understand and support our colleagues who are in district libraries, because right now, even if we were able to diversify our revenue, we have to figure out the right pathways in concert with park districts, power, light, and water, utility, etc. And as our last questioner suggested, the coalitions and partnerships are essential right now, because we, as a single agency in any community, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural, there's a lot of other folks who are part of ecosystem building that we should be alongside and getting paid to do it. So, Georgette, thank you for this time today. I appreciate it.
Of course. So if you enjoyed today's webinar, Bibliotheca is continually adding resources to our resource center on bibliotheca.com/funding libraries. We invite you to bookmark this page and stay up to date with the latest developments and news on ARPA. And make sure that you also subscribe to our insights and trends so that you can get further information. And obviously, we are regularly posting on LinkedIn and Facebook. So if you want to follow those, you can be at the forefront of what's happening. So as we finish today, we'd like everybody to complete a quick survey. If you have any questions, comments, idea, let us know. We'd love to hear from you and use your feedback to continually evolve this webinar series. Just a reminder, we will circulate this chat log and links to resources in our follow-up email, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox. And we'll also post a recording of this keynote and the slide deck on our website, which will also include the bibliography and any additional resources.
Georgette, thanks again. And everybody out there, if you know, EveryLibrary works at the local level. It's sometimes as small as one zip code on the funding formula for libraries. We do it because of donors like Bibliotheca, individual donors around the country, and we do it pro bono and for free because of their support. So if you want to give me a shout, my contact information is here, not just because I enjoy, you know, seeing it on the screen. It's because we're here to help you think it through.
Thank you, John, for a very insightful discussion. From all of us here at Bibliotheca, we thank you for joining this webinar and wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Well, Georgette, thank you. Mackenzie, thank you
Of
for
course.
the technology.
Thanks, John.
Caroline, thank you for your support and your wisdom here. I'd love to do an after action with you at some point,
Yes.
but not today.
Yeah.
And
We'll schedule something.
I think you have all the resources you need from me to put everything up on the site. Great. Then we'll schedule something.
We do.
Thanks for going a little long with me. I think it was worth doing. We held on